Hey everybody, just wanted to make this video, most important of all, to apologize for my hiatus over the last month. It's completely unexcusable. I've had a lot of stuff going on in my life lately. All good, but it did put things on hold for a bit. First, I am permanent at my day job now, so that's good, steady income, or at least close to steady income. I also just moved into a new place, as you can kind of see behind me. Well, nothing knew what my old place looked like, because as you can also see, this is my first video with a camera. Alright, so now you get to see my ugly mug while listening to me talk about gaming stuff. Aside from that, the biggest thing that kept me from kind of moving forward and continuing with my videos is that I temporarily signed on with a up-and-coming gaming news site called Gamers Pantheon. And long story short, I made a couple videos for them, and then I did step down. There was no bad blood, nothing bad happened. It was just kind of a thing where I realized that I really wanted to be here. I really wanted to stay here, and I wanted to make Stiles Series Synopsis grow and become what I always wanted it to be, the show I always wanted it to be, hence the camera, which, of course, isn't the best camera on the market, but it's pretty good. It'll be good enough for me to learn what I'm doing. As you can see, I'm trying to improvise with lighting. I was trying to make a good setup, and yeah. So I'm hoping things will move on from here. As far as the Gamers Pantheon thing goes, please go check out their stuff. They're really good guys over there. There's one amazing article that I found hilarious about how one of the MLB games is actually the greatest RPG ever made, and you just have to go check it out. On top of that, they did just get done with Final Fantasy Week, which I made a video for. Actually, the video you clicked on if you're watching this, for Final Fantasy Explorers. And yeah, that's kind of the end of it. I'm going to be continuing with everything the way I've been doing it, and I hope things continue to grow and expand from here. I'm really excited. Thank you all for supporting me so far, and I hope you'll continue to support me, and I hope... Well, not I hope. I will make it my mission to not let something like this happen again. Alright, thank you very much. I'll see you guys all later. Before I begin, I want to apologize for all the footage in this video being from trailers. Unfortunately, I don't have a 3DS capture card, and this is the best I could do. Though this will likely surprise no one, I feel obligated to say that I'm a huge fan of the Final Fantasy series. I own every English release title, and even a couple that never officially left Japan. I've written articles spanning 8 pages on average of each title in the main series, with shorter reviews for almost every spin-off title as well. I am well seasoned when it comes to the series in particular, and saying I'm a fanboy would be a stretch depending on your definition of the word. Trust me, I don't think every game in the series is gold. In fact, I feel that a lot of them are quite poor. But even so, I've reached a point in my life where I feel obligated to purchase, play, and review pretty much every game in the series. So the question wasn't, will I play Final Fantasy Explorers, but more, when? Well, apparently when was day one, as I ended up pre-ordering the title, and after a good 30 hours of game time, I've come to the conclusion that Final Fantasy Explorers is... okay. First impressions were not good. While I enjoy the cartoony and colorful style that harkens back to the Crystal Chronicles sub-series, the choppy frame rate, lacking draw distance, and worst of all, the bloom effect that leaves the entire world looking washed out were all causes for concern. Thankfully, most of these issues were just a bad first impression, as the longer I played, the less I noticed the bloom. And the frame rate stayed mostly consistent, though it did feel like that consistency was around the 25 frames per second mark and not a true 30. That is until you get swarmed with enemies or play multiplayer, that is, where the frame rate will fall fairly regularly and cause a great deal of slowdown. Despite my issues with the game's graphics and performance, the soundtrack was decent. It's the sort of score that is suitable for this style of game. A bit subtle, so it enhances the exploration without ever being grating despite how many times you hear the same tracks. I can't think of any songs that stand out enough for me to want to listen to them outside of the game, but they work well in context. It also feels a bit harsh to criticize Final Fantasy Explorers for not having a good story, because it's not the type of thing generally associated with the genre it resides in. Even so, if you were expecting a story of some kind, you will definitely be disappointed. It's not an exaggeration at all to say that the story barely exists. You're exploring a previously unsurveyed island that is a grand crystal. The last boss takes place at said crystal once you can finally access it. In between lies 20 to 30 hours of pure gameplay. There are no characters, just human-shaped vending machines and quest boards. This may have been a tactic to try and emphasize the multiplayer, but it just kind of feels cheap if you're going solo. I knew going in that Final Fantasy Explorers is often referred to as a Monster Hunter clone, but I must admit I'm not all that familiar with said series. I've tried playing them on numerous occasions and found myself stalling out rather quickly because of the high barrier of entry and repetitive structure. I found Final Fantasy Explorers to be much more user-friendly, which at first I saw as a good thing, but things really never pick up from there. It feels like the developers tried really hard to balance the game in such a way that it can be completed by solo players as well as in groups online, and by doing so, made the game lack difficulty entirely. The game follows a rather rigid and formulaic structure of get quest, kill/collect specified thing, repeat. You do all of this from a single hub town with only a handful of different looking locations and another ridiculously small amount of monsters. I got to the end of the main story section only to find I'd already slayed more than 80% of all enemy types in the game. Supposedly I was only halfway done with the game's actual missions, but I'd already seen the vast majority of the content it had to offer, which was a painful reminder that the post-game would provide nothing fresh to spice up the experience. These titles are often known for the endgame and post-game content, but by the time I got to it, I had already had more than my fill. I pressed on for the sake of the review and can tell you that it is just more of the same. I can admittedly see myself getting more invested if I were able to just play this game in short bursts over a much longer period of time, but because I was reviewing the title, I had to binge play, and that made the repetition even more grating. Combat itself generally comes down to finding a series of attacks that work for your playstyle and spamming them from the beginning of each quest to the end. The game tries to remedy this by making all special attacks drain a stamina bar, but once that is empty, all you have to do is use a few weaker combos to fill that meter back up before the pattern repeats itself once more. Exploration is also uninteresting, and actually leans to the side of frustration at times because of all the running you have to do to get to each particular boss encounter. The game does give you access to an airship later on, which essentially works as a teleporter where you choose your starting spawn point for each mission, but there are multiple locations that can't be teleported to no matter what, and while traveling those long distances one or two times wouldn't be too terrible, the frequency of this kind of travel makes it feel rather cumbersome, especially when every single map is nothing but a place for enemies and materials to spawn. Customization is the only place the title really shines and will be the only thing that keeps dedicated players going. The promise of your character becoming even stronger through the creation of increasingly rare armor sets is what really drags people in and can cause them to get addicted. I even felt this addiction creeping in on me for a while despite my disappointment at the rest of the game's middling quality. The game contains a familiar Final Fantasy job system that allows you to play over 20 different roles that fall into the usual tank, healer, DPS, and buff/debuff categories in an attempt to make party play more important. In an interesting and rather intelligent turn of events, however, they decide to not have the classes level up separately. In fact, your level means nothing in terms of character customization or power. Instead, all of your stats are decided purely on your equipment, which means that if you get bored, you can switch to another class at any time without much of a penalty. The game's most creative feature is the ability customization, which allows you to potentially purchase permanent versions of temporary enhancements you have the random chance of activating while out on missions. This is the deepest and most interesting mechanic in the entire game, but sadly, once I found a set that worked for me at about 1/4 of the way through the game, I had no reason to ever change it again. By the way, the HP drain enhancement is overpowered as all hell. A huge draw of this title is obviously the multiplayer component, and I attempted to make use of the feature at multiple points, only to be left disappointed. The game didn't feel to me to be at all optimized for it in terms of performance, difficulty balancing, or team making. To be fair, by the time I got to the post-game, I couldn't find anyone on my level to play with, so that may be an issue that fixes itself later, but in the end I don't feel it matters because the structure of the game remains bland and repetitive. I was obviously hoping that the Final Fantasy trappings would help ease me into this style of gameplay, but if anything, being a Final Fantasy fan made this game more disappointing than it did boost its appeal. I felt like a lot of the fan service was pandering and not at all well implemented. Turning into an established Final Fantasy character for a limited amount of time felt like a slap in the face more than a boon, because it made it even more obvious how unimportant and pointless your custom-created character was. It also didn't help that the majority of the game's bosses, which shape the form of famous Final Fantasy creatures and summons, were ridiculously simple to defeat. It should never be possible to solo fight against Omega, one of the most notoriously difficult fights in the entire Final Fantasy series, without dying or struggling at all. I initially thought that Final Fantasy Explorers was lacking an identity, but the more I think on it, the more that seems inaccurate. It has an identity, and the blend of Monster Hunter and Final Fantasy could actually make for a decent combination. The problem is the elements from both sides just feel extremely shallow and unrefined here. Monster Hunter fans will likely find it a far too simple and watered down experience. Fans of Final Fantasy may find that the lack of story and direction leaves it feeling a bit half-assed. It's functional, and I'm sure a lot of people will be able to get fun out of it, but this is where I throw in the reminder that fun does not always equate to quality. Final Fantasy Explorers is akin to video game junk food. It's not really good for you. You know that cooking something more extravagant would be more fulfilling, but when you just aren't up for putting in that kind of work, games like this are a good way to tide yourself over until your next true meal. Hello everyone, and thanks for watching. For more gaming news, reviews, and other editorials, don't forget to check out gamerspantheon.com. It is currently Final Fantasy Week over there, so if you want more Final Fantasy awesomeness, go check it out.